Striking faculty at 24 colleges across Ontario this week voted 86% against the final offer in their contract dispute with the colleges. Nevertheless, they're going back to work as the government decided it was time to step in and legislate an end to the longest college strike in Ontario history. That means 500,000 full and part-time students will be heading back to class at some point next week, and many of them may now be asking just what the whole thing accomplished. Joining us now to consider that, from London, Ontario, via Skype, Morgana Sampson. She's president of the Fanshawe College Student Union. And here in our studio, Enrique Ponce. He is president of the Sheridan College Student Union. And Rafael Gomez, director of the Centre for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the University of Toronto. Rafael, it's good to see you again. Enrique, nice to meet you for the first time. And Morgana, same thing. Good to have you on our program for the first time. Shall we start with a little soundbite here, folks, and get us into the spirit of the thing? Sure. Okay, Sheldon, all yours. Roll up, please.
We had 95% of faculty who voted. Of those, 10,447 voted to reject. Yes. 1,663 voted to accept. Where do we need to go now?
In fact, they're not going back to the table. In fact, the provincial government has stepped in and legislated an end to this thing, or will try to do so over the weekend. Enrique, I want to start with you. Now that the proposal has been overwhelmingly rejected and the legislature is getting ready to do its business to end this whole thing, what are you going to be doing over the next week to sort of assist students at Sheridan get their lives back on track?
Yeah, that's a tough one because we know it's going to be difficult to acclimatize our students once they get back into class. And we've been working with some of the resources that we have on campus to just have some sort of wellness program once they get back into the classroom, because the big thing that's been affecting our students is the mental health aspect. So we know they're not going to be motivated when they want to get back to class, so we're going to really try to have some sort of de-stress activities, really try to be...
What does that mean, de-stress activities?
De-stress activities, you know, we try to run, we ran some when we hit midterm mark, and that looks like having pause rooms, so therapeutic dogs. We're looking to have, you know, some of our regular programming in our pubs to kind of have that fun, because we know that they're going to be really stressed, but at the same time, we want to make sure that they're sort of ready to get back in the classroom. So we're working with some of our college administration to
Good. Morgana, let me get the same from you. What's going on in London that you think will ease everybody back into the classroom?
So we will be working on actually similar things as Enrique had said. So a lot of stress relief stuff. We have a chill lounge that'll be happening on the Wednesday. We have free food as well that's going to be going on the Monday and Wednesday. So students should look out for that. Just as a big welcome back. And we might do a sort of a photo booth with strike survivors. We survived the strike sort of idea. Gotcha.
Morgana, just to help everybody understand how stressful the last 5 weeks have been for students who, at one level, I guess you've had a lot of time off to consider your futures, but at another level, I'm sure there's been some concern about potentially losing your year and all of that.
There's been so much student concern. I consistently just hear anxiety from students. Students are telling me it feels like no one cares about my education or my future, and they want to get back to class. This break has not been a break for students. It's been 5 weeks of anxiety and concern. People are uncertain about placement. There's placement questions. There's lease agreement questions. There's funding questions. There's so many questions that are unanswered right now, and that leaves students in a state of, where should I go from here, and who's going to help me?
Well, that's a good list of questions, and Enrique, I'm going to add another one to the list. Who do you blame?
Well, it's tough to point a direct finger at somebody, because we try to respect the process, and we know that faculty want to get certain outcomes. But I think this has been very different from any other strike, where it's just the specific points when it comes to academic freedom and when it comes to full-time ratio. It's not an easy one to negotiate. So I don't think there's really one person to blame, because both are trying to negotiate, and we have to kind of respect that process. But it's just been kind of tough being a student and caught in the middle where we don't know where to go next.
Morgana, when you talk to your friends, do they blame one side over the other, or even a third party for what's gone on?
they're overall just frustrated, and my big sticking point is that students are not at the table, and we have no representation within the bargaining process, and that's where I have an issue. So I'd like to see that this never happens again, and that that when there's another strike, students are not, their education is not at a potential loss, and that no harm can come to their education. They're paying for a service that they haven't received. So overall, it's the process that's not correct and that needs to be resolved and fixed.
Let's pick up on that. Raphael, how could the process have been, I mean, it's a collective bargaining dispute, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
they negotiate.
Yeah.
They couldn't come to an agreement.
Yeah.
What could be different so that, you know, if this ever were to happen again, students aren't sitting there for 5 weeks waiting to find out what's going to happen?
Well, I think the issues, and I thought this was a new idea. We were discussing this earlier in the week when a reporter from the Star phoned a bunch of IR experts, industrial relations experts, to get their take on it. My view was that the colleges have outgrown a system in which all of these things get centrally bargained. There's just one bargain agent, basically, for all 24 colleges.
Exactly. They don't bargain individually college by college.
No.
One agent for all 24.
Yeah, and in fact, it's been strengthened as a result of a report in 2008 by Whitaker. It's called the Whitaker Report. And actually strengthened that to some extent. Gave the powers to bargain exclusively to this third party, which had already pre-existed, but it was reinforced, this council of colleges.
So should we go to a new system where it's college by college bargaining with its individual faculty?
Well, this is what's interesting. I thought that was sort of a ready point that we now have come to terms with, but there have been series of reports on the colleges going back to 1985, which was almost the 20-year mark of the history. It was the Solnick report. And there, Solnick was trying to figure out what were all the problems. There weren't strikes because it was very hard to get to a strike. There were all these third parties that could be brought in before a strike was triggered, mediators, fact finders, then arbitrators. You know, there was a lot of steps and hurdles to get to a strike position. But one of the things they said is that almost every bargaining round, and back then there were yearly collective agreements because of inflation. So you could only have a bargaining collective agreement for 1 year and then be bargaining again. Fortunately, we're not there. But one of the conclusions of these reports was the colleges have outgrown the system that was designed initially to be one system. They didn't want, when Bill Davis and his colleagues set up the college system in their foresight, they didn't want a US-style piecemeal system. Community colleges were very diverse in their quality. Ontario didn't want that. They'd scanned the models of the US, too decentralized. So they thought of it as a real coherent system. At the time, there were half a dozen colleges.
And we have to revisit that.
I think so, because the colleges have the largest college in the late 60s had 10,000 students. I think it was Seneca.
Now it's 100,000.
Yeah, it's a system that's, I think, requires a little more decentralization. They did allow in this Whitaker report for more local bargaining, but because you have this very strong central bargaining agent, kind of all these issues that should be dealt with at a more local level get pushed to the top, as Enrique was saying. Very hard to negotiate those kinds of ideas for a 24 college system.
Let me get Morgana on that. Have you had any discussions with your fellow students about whether or not it makes more sense to go to a different kind of bargaining model so the whole college system, 500,000 students, are not all, and I hate this expression, but it works, held hostage by other activities?
I think that's a really great point that was made there about every different college has different needs, right? And to bargain all together might not be the most efficient way. So yes, it's something that we should look at, certainly.
What do you think, Enrique?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because that's something that even Morgana and I were kind of discussing when we had the opportunity to meet with Deb Matthews. And
this is the minister in charge.
Yeah, minister in charge. And that was kind of our frustration, where this sort of bargaining system is not working. And I think there needs to be a different take on it, because it's hard enough to bargain on those top issues, but it's even more so to kind of paint all 24 colleges with the same brush.
When you said to Deb Matthews, the advanced education minister, this new system isn't working, did she agree?
Well, she didn't really comment too much, because we were really trying to advocate on multiple issues, and it's hard to talk to so many pieces when we only have half an hour of her time.
Gotcha.
So it wasn't discussed at length, but we did make it evident that we want to be at the table. We want to be a part of that process. What that exactly looks like, I don't know, but I think it's something that myself and my peers are going to be advocating for.
Raphael?
But one thing I wanted to mention was that you can still get the best of both worlds. There are certain advantages to having a collective, sort of a sectoral approach. Those things are very good to bargain over very general items, benefits, pensions, general wage agreements. For the province especially, when you get hit by, say, another financial crisis, we hope not, and your finances are hit, it's nice to have a lever that you can push so that wages don't spiral out of control and you affect quality of education. Those sorts of high-level items could still be done in this very sectoral approach. But then everything else, these questions about academic freedom are so diverse across the college system. Imagine a college that's highly technical in its training. It's not an issue that's very pertinent to that group. Whereas a college that's expanded, that's gone into delivery of bachelor's programs, that's a very vital issue.
Might be a factor there.
Yeah.
Morgana, you wanted to come in.
I was going to say that that when we met with Deb Matthews, it sounded like she wants to have students at the table or somewhere in the process, and at least that's a starting point, right? She's been saying that a lot in the media, that she's there for the students, she's advocating for the students as well. So I'd like to see that put to action, of course.
Tell me what that actually looks like, Morgana. If you could have been in the room meeting with the mediators at the bargaining table, with the Public Service Employees Union, with the College Council, which was representing all of the managements of all of the councils, of all the colleges, what would have been the value of you being at that table?
The value would have been, even as an observer spot, it would have been fantastic for students to have direct information from what's actually going on at the table, instead of hearing through third-party resources, the media, about what's happening between OPSEU and CEC. Just to have that direct line of communication to the students would be valuable in diminishing and decreasing the anxieties that students are having throughout the strike.
How many times do you think over the last 5 weeks did you have students coming up to you asking you for information on what was the latest and what are the prospects and so on and so forth?
An unreal amount of time. I can't even count the number of times, because there were so many students. And more so, it was on social media. You see so many posts just about what is even the point in school anymore. If I come back in 5 weeks, am I going to have a crammed semester and have to learn all this information in a short period of time? Right?
Raphael, I noticed that earlier this week, a Toronto law firm is, I guess, entertaining a potential class action lawsuit on behalf of more than a dozen students against the colleges, claiming breach of contract. What are the prospects for success in that suit?
Well, I've consulted with my labor law professors who know more about this than I would, and apparently the company, the law firm that's leading this, is a specialist in class action lawsuits. This is what they do. So I would imagine that they've seen an opportunity, and perhaps, and it is true that rights conflict. There's a Supreme Court decision that has basically given the right to strike a validation. It's part of our Charter of Freedoms, the right, so the freedom of association. So it's very hard to take that right away. But it doesn't mean that it can't clash with other rights. And what they're talking about is how the students have had essentially a contract with the colleges to deliver education, and there's been a breach of that contract. I don't think it's going to lead anywhere, to be honest, especially given that the government's going to step in, reinstate the term. I like the approach that the student unions do, which they see that there are two parties. They both have valid concerns, and they just want a part in the process. I think there's a real opportunity to be leading edge here. You probably heard of this term, the stakeholder approach. So even broadly, to call it capitalism, we need other parties that are external sometimes to the decisions that two parties make. And these externalities can be captured by stakeholder approaches. Why not innovate and have a model where students are not bargaining at the table, but are present? And that might even moderate the way in which two groups are likely to make decisions when they realize the main constituent, in this case the students, are there
right
listening.
Well, you know what? You said something in the midst of that answer that I want to pick up on, because you said it's difficult to get rid of the right to strike that teachers now enjoy. Okay, however, the Ontario legislature, in its wisdom, several years ago, decided that the Toronto Transit Commission was such an essential service to the way this city functions, they took away TTC workers' right to strike, and they can't do it anymore. And I want to ask whether or not we're on similar ground as it relates to college professors, instructors, teachers, and so on. Enrique, do we need to take away the right to strike for the people who've just gone out for the last 5 weeks?
Yeah, that's a topic that has been brought up among my peers as well, and it's...
What's the consensus?
I think it's one where, again, where I bring it back to remodeling, and if there, I think when you look at a strike and the impact, the scope of impact of people, I think that's a good sort of tie-in into TTC and how the scope of impact affects so many people. It's the same thing with the colleges, where we're affecting 500,000 students. There's not a lot of sort of laborers in the industry that have that effect. Sometimes it's
okay, but I'm not hearing you say yes or no. What's your view on it?
It is.
It's a toughie. No, of course.
It's
all about shades of grey. Morgana, come on in.
Yeah. Okay, so I really think that we need some sort of direction and an oversight to when education is at risk and when students' education is at risk. Because in this, there was none. And we've just been going off the basis that, it might potentially end in 3.5 weeks. A student has never lost a semester before. But in this case, we are very close. Like, we are at that threshold where we can't go any further. And we need to have some sort of oversight so that this never happens, right?
But there are but there are strong tests. Well, part of the reason this Whitaker report in 2008 was following a Saskatchewan decision where the government kind of unilaterally took away a lot of the right to strike for public sector workers, and the Supreme Court really pulled the threshold higher to make that case. I don't know if the college system, maybe under its present system, where you have one bargaining agent and it affects so many students, you could argue, yeah, you can have a strike option in that system. But if you decentralized it and kind of said, well, wage bargaining is sort of out of the scope of what you could strike over, but things that are dealt at a local issue, maybe. I think that's a hard test now to make.
Go ahead, Morgana.
Or you can just have a strike period for, say, 3 weeks or so. I've heard, and I don't know, do you know actually, say, paramedics and police officers, they only are allowed to strike for a certain period of time because they're a fundamental service. How is education any different?
Yeah, the problem is that the bargaining agents then don't really work towards a bargain. When they know that there's a finite time and someone will step in, they actually don't negotiate an outcome. And that imposes costs, because then we as a province are funding mediators, arbitrators, and that's a cost to the system. You would hope the parties, and that was with the hope of the Whitaker report, that you had a mature system now, it was 50 years old, and you could have bargaining agents that could get to the outcomes. In fact, the employers asked for this to actually make it more like basically the Labor Relations Act that pertains to all employees in the province. Up until then, the colleges had, like I said, all these sort of safeguards to get to the strike. You had to climb a lot of hurdles, and the employer said, take that away. And now look at what we are
where we are.
Yeah.
We got a couple of minutes left, and let me put one more issue on the table here. And I mean, we know the province has saved millions of dollars in not having to pay faculty while they have been on strike. And there has been some question about what's going to happen, all that money they've saved. And there's been a suggestion that, and Sheldon, here we are in the middle of page 5 here, let's bring this quote up. The province's colleges, according to Deb Matthews, the minister, the province's colleges must create a fund to help students who may be experiencing financial hardship because of a faculty strike that has canceled classes for almost a month. She said this a week ago. Ms. Matthews says Ontario's 24 colleges will establish the dedicated fund with all of the savings from the strike made up of unpaid wages to striking staff and other savings from not operating the schools. So, Morgana, my question is, how's that fund going to work, and are you guys going to get some money back, or what's happening here?
So Sheridan and actually Humber, I was going to be on a call this past week with Deb Matthews, actually asking questions about the fund, and what we basically heard was Deb said there was $5 million in the pot, and that it would be distributed to colleges when, like, depending on need, and the college would actually pay the students right out depending on need. So things that could potentially be considered would be things that are over and above, it seems, anything over and above any regular costs of funding for colleges. Does that make sense? And Enrique, actually, can you add into this? You were there.
Yeah. I actually had a rep on that call as well, and they talked about how that would be administered, and I know it's going to be a very difficult process because apparently it's going to be a committee that is going to be formed, and it's going to be 50% students, and the rest is going to be college administration that's going to be vetting students' concerns in terms of how they've been financially impacted by.
Because you guys were all, I mean, presumably, don't come in here because I'm out of time.
No worries, no.
But I just, you guys expected the school year to be over at a certain point, at which point you might be getting into summer jobs and making money, and now I guess the school year is going to go longer. You're going to miss those opportunities to make that money in June or July or whatever. So compensation is necessary. Is that your view?
I think so, because, and I don't know if that fund is going to be enough for all of our students.
Understood. Can I thank Morgana Sampson, who's the president of the Fanshawe Student Union. She was there via Skype in London, Ontario. Enrique Ponce, president of the Sheridan Student Union, and Rafael Gomez from the University of Toronto. Rafael, I knew you were brilliant, but to see such fabulously well-spoken young people on our program,
gives us hope.
The student political movement is in good shape, I think, if you two are any indication. So thanks for being on our program tonight here on TVO.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.